My app for React Redux is called YOM. It is YOM, which was standing for You Owe Me. It is a child custody tracker app for expenses that fall outside of what is included in child support. This is something that I ended up needing halfway or three-fourths the way through the program at Flatiron, and I was kind of losing my mind keeping track of what my ex-husband had paid me from expenses that we had to pay. So when you are a custodial parent, you pay for everything up front and then you have to get reimbursed. And in order to track that and make sure that you're getting paid, you have to keep a very detailed log of what your expenses are, provide the expense amounts in adequate time, and then also you have to have data to support if something's being paid or not. If you ever want to, if it's not being paid and you have to go to court, you have to have really solid records of that. So this is something that I needed whenever I am trying to build an app for the program or anything, when I'm thinking of ideas and going through, a couple of ideas, and I'm thinking, is it something I could use for work that's going to streamline a process at my office and make my life easier at work? Is it something that could be used by someone else that I have noticed would be helpful for them at their work or life? Is it something that's going to help me in my daily life? Or is it just something that the general consumer public, all the people, they might like as an app? So I'm going to share my screen. So I didn't do authentication. That's something that I plan to do down the road. I actually want to rebuild this app with Node backend, so I was going to do authentication once I make this app better instead of using Rails, using Node backend. So when you go in, you have your home page. It's for tracking expenses, so if your spouse drags their feet and never pays, you don't have to lose your mind for keeping track of the expenses. Then you go to your expenses page, and on that page there's the table of all the expenses being sorted by descending date. Also, I wanted like a one-page app that someone could just do everything that they needed on one page. I didn't want there to be any too many crazy links or complexities of like actually what they need, because you just need what you need. So I have my forms on this page. You can toggle all the forms if you want, or you can choose to make a new expense. If you make a new expense, one thing I really liked was React. If you use the input date as type date, then this whole amazing calendar pops out. So I'm going to add an expense to show how it works. So my last entry was June for school. So I'm just going to add another future entry that I know will be there. And I'll say June 1st. My category is going to be sports. And it's dance for my daughter, and the amount of $65 per month. And we split it in half, something that we chose to do. And it's showing not paid because this is the future. So then I'm going to submit, and a couple of things are going to happen. So the form clears, my total expenses outstanding updated, and then it adds dance to it. And these are showing, I'm going to actually remove I'll show how this works. So one thing that I cared about was being able to track if something was paid or not. He's actually only paid obviously through December. So I'm going to change this from paid to unpaid. And when you do that, it flops it out it cancels it to 0 because nothing has been paid. And then this is updated. So $679, and then we'll do not paid. So it's increasing the expenses since I'm changing it to not paid. Total expenses still increasing. The table is still staying format by date descending. And so then these are all my future expenses that actually I need to add. So I have sports, school, sports. And then I have 11, so I need dance for November and December. So we'll go ahead and add those because those were paid. November 1st, dance. And those were paid. So obviously this is not going to update to anything because it's been paid and it was added for my dance showing paid. And then I'm going to add another one for December 1st for sports and dance. And also showing paid. Now, if they didn't, and when you hit submit, it resets the refs, which will change the input back to the original form. If someone didn't have, let's say they download the app and there's not going to be any categories or anything added. So this drop box is going to be empty. It's just going to say select category. So that's why I have don't see what you're looking for, create a new category. Let me think of something. Maybe I'll just do a test category. Or I think I added like everything possible. Maybe do a miscellaneous or something. So if I add a new category, I'm going to get rid of my expense form. Actually, I'll keep it there. Add a new category. Let's just say miscellaneous and submit it. And then when I submit it, it's going to now be available inside of my category form. And this is all happening obviously because when you're creating something or updating, you're updating the state, dispatching it, you're dispatching the action, and then you're sending it to the back end, then you're getting information, it's being created, and then it's dispatching to the reducer's updating state, and then pulling back into the render. So I am pretty excited about my app. There's other things I want to do, but I actually wanted to add the features once I built it in Node. My area where I live is a heavy Node community, so I knew that I needed projects for something that would actually help me get a job. I don't think that a Rails backend is going to help me get a job where I live. So I plan to add a lot of features when I get going with the language that I actually need to be learning, but I'm pretty excited. And yeah, pretty standard. So I have my, just to explain the requirements that I did meet, I have my containers. Forms are easier to be a container since we're going to be doing something and we're updating information. So I have my category form and my expense form. And then my expenses page is what we see here. That's keeping track of every single thing on the page. And then I have all the different components that make up the page. So my expense detail I actually didn't use. That's something I got rid of. I can actually delete that. My expense list item. This I did keep the state because I have this handle paid click button that I really did need to keep track of all of that. And then it's just showing this entire line I went through, and that's my expense list item. And then in my expense list table, I'm passing in my expenses. And this is a line actually that gave me a lot of trouble. This line solved my problem. When I went through my expense, my expenses are an object. Each expense is an object. And then nested within is another object that's a category. So I was having a problem because when it originally renders on the page, the expense is not defined. It doesn't kick in until it actually pulls through. And so I had to do a check. I couldn't go through a nested object. You can't have a child based on an object. So I had to save that information into a constant first. So I'm checking first to see if there's an expense or if there's an object. If there is, then we will go to the category or empty object. So the reason we're checking for this is because it's coming in undefined, and you can't have an object that is a child of another object. You can't map through that. But I needed to be able to map through to get this name item, and that was the way for me to check if it's an expense or if it's an object. So then when I go to my expense list item, I'm just sending in the actual category, which is the name itself. And that solved a lot of problems for me. I spent a lot of time on this one particular line of code that I know I'm going to have to use for other areas once I update the app with a Node backend. Other things that I have in here that are components, I have my footer, my home, and my nav bar, and these are all just pure code that I'm just going through and I'm exporting just specific, nothing, no actual JavaScript needed. It's just I'm sending back code that I want. Well, here's some React stuff, but pure code that's not functions, and I'm just sending back information. One thing I did also want was if they don't have any expenses in the database, which inside of my expenses page, I have a check for this. If there is not data, then I want this to display on this page. So on my expenses page, if there's no data, they're only going to see these toggle forms in order to create something new, and then they're going to see this information to create a new category, keeping records, and just like a little detail on how important it is to keep records. One thing I also did was for these toggle forms, I wanted to break them down and be very specific. So I have this section, this entire space that's including the buttons and the forms, and I'm calling that toggle forms. And in my toggle forms, I did the design for React Bootstrap. So I have my toggle buttons, and then I'm rendering my buttons that are coming from my toggle buttons, and I'm rendering the form cards, which are coming from separate. So here in these, I just decided to have functions for each and export them as constants anyway, back into my toggle forms. Then I have my totals, which is just a function as well. It's rendering, well, my totals is being updated on my expenses page since it's dealing with the state of the program. But this is just rendering this little section of outstanding expenses and showing total paid. My total paid is something I'm passing in from my expenses page, where I'm using, I'm calculating a total based on an expense amount and the reimbursed percent. Because if they owe 50% of the amount, then I want to get that information. And I need that. I don't need to store it in the back end because it's a little bit of information that it doesn't really matter for the record, but it matters for being able to send. If I want to do a print screen, I can send a print screen to my ex-husband. So then when the button changes, we have to update the outstanding total. And we're checking the expenses, we're filtering them by expenses paid, and then we're mapping through each expense and calculating the total. And then also for current total, if the expenses length is greater than 1, then we are reducing all of the items in that expense array, and we are updating the total here, where we're sending in the total and we're sending in the numbers and we're adding them together. And then in my expenses page, I'm just rendering my forms, my toggle forms, my outstanding total section, and my expenses table. And if there is data. If there is no data, then we're just rendering the component that says no data. And that is about it. Thanks.